Ancient myths are not just fables for children. They are a hidden language, a complex code left behind by our ancestors. This code holds profound wisdom about the universe and our own minds, carefully woven into the fabric of every epic tale. By the end of this journey, you will possess a new lens to see the true meaning behind stories of gods and monsters. We will uncover why a serpent appears across all cultures and what the Great Flood really symbolizes. Are you ready to hear what these old stories have been trying to say all along? Think back to a story you were told as a child, perhaps a simple tale of a hero defeating a monster. It seemed straightforward then, a simple battle between good and evil. But what if that story was never just a story? What if it was a container built to hold a truth too vast or too dangerous to state plainly? This is the nature of myth. For too long, we have dismissed these ancient narratives as primitive attempts to explain lightning or the changing seasons. But this view crumbles when you look at their stunning complexity and the fact that the same core stories appear in cultures separated by vast oceans and thousands of years. A scholar named Joseph Campbell spent his life studying this pattern. He described myths not as failed science, but as the collective dreams of humanity. They are a language of symbols that speak directly to the deepest parts of our psyche, addressing universal fears, desires, and questions about our place in the cosmos. To understand this language, we must first define its medium. A myth is distinct from a legend or a folktale. A legend might be based on a distorted historical event, while a folktale is often a local story for entertainment. A myth, however, operates on a grander scale. It deals with the fundamental questions of existence, the nature of the divine, and the journey of the human soul. The theory then becomes compelling. What if these myths were not random fictions, but deliberate, sophisticated constructions? In a world without hard drives or libraries, how do you preserve essential knowledge for millennia? You encode it into a story. Stories are resilient, they are memorable, they are transmissible, and they can survive the collapse of empires. The very structure of the classic hero's journey, with its call to adventure, its road of trials, and its ultimate transformation, may be more than just a good plot. It could be a fundamental grammatical rule of this lost language, a repeating pattern designed to convey a specific process of inner growth or external discovery. Before we can even hope to read the messages, we must first accept that we are looking at a sophisticated code. So, what would the grammar of such a language look like? It would not be built from nouns and verbs, but from symbols and archetypes. Imagine trying to explain the theory of relativity to someone who has never seen a modern laboratory. You would not use equations, you would use analogies they could grasp, like a ship sailing on a vast, curving ocean. This is the essence of the proposed language of the gods. It is a symbolic, metaphorical system designed to convey immense truths through the limited imagery of its time. Its primary grammatical rule is analogy, where one thing represents another to reveal a deeper connection. The vocabulary of this language is drawn from the world its original listeners knew intimately. Celestial bodies become its nouns. The sun is not just a star, it is a symbol of consciousness, of life-giving force, of the Father principle. The moon is not a rock, but a representation of the unconscious, of cycles, of the mother. Natural elements form its adjectives. Water is the substance of the subconscious and emotion. Fire is the agent of transformation and spirit. A mountain is not merely a landform, it is a symbol of ascent, of challenge, of getting closer to the divine. This language also speaks in numbers. The recurring pattern of the number 12 is a perfect example. We see it in the 12 Olympians, the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 disciples, even the 12 signs of the zodiac. In this symbolic language, 12 is not a quantity, it is a concept. It is a word that means cosmic order, completeness, and the full cycle of manifestation. This is a system that operates on multiple levels at once. On the surface, it tells a compelling story about Zeus and Hera for the general populace. But for those with eyes to see, the same narrative encodes principles of psychology, cosmology, and the structure of the soul. The purpose is to create a vessel for knowledge that cannot perish. Stone tablets erode, kingdoms fall, but a well-told myth can survive for thousands of years, carrying its coded message intact across generations. To even begin deciphering it, we must first recognize its most fundamental and powerful feature, the very heart of its vocabulary, universal symbolism. This symbolic vocabulary finds its most potent expression in the serpent. In one culture, the serpent is a villain, a representation of chaos and deception that must be conquered. In another, it is a sacred emblem of wisdom and healing coiled around the staff of a physician. In yet another, it is the very symbol of rebirth, shedding its skin to emerge renewed. This is not a contradiction in the language of the gods, it is nuance. The serpent is a single word with multiple, context-dependent meanings, a versatile symbol for the powerful, unseen forces that shape existence. The bedrock of this entire system is symbolism itself, the method of compressing a complex idea into a single, unforgettable image. Consider the Egyptian Ankh. On the surface, it is a hieroglyph meaning life, but in the deeper grammar, it is a geometric diagram. Its loop represents the feminine, the womb of eternal existence, while its crossbar represents the masculine, the world of manifestation. Together, they are a complete statement about the union of opposites that generates all life, a profound cosmological principle captured in a shape you can hold in your hand. These universal symbols are the true nouns and verbs of the lost language. The world tree is not just a tree. It is a noun meaning the axis of the universe, the connection between heaven, earth, and the underworld. The Great Flood is not just a disaster, it is a verb meaning a cosmic cleansing, the dissolution of an old order to make way for the new. The phoenix, which rises from its own ashes, is a powerful verb phrase meaning cyclical regeneration. Perhaps no symbol demonstrates this cross-cultural consistency better than the Ouroboros, the serpent devouring its own tail. In ancient Mesopotamia, it represented the encircling ocean and the unity of the world. In Norse mythology, the great serpent Jörmungandr encircles the entire world, its tail in its mouth, symbolizing the endless cycle of the ages. In Gnostic traditions, it was an emblem of eternity and the self-sufficient cycle of nature. Everywhere it appears, it speaks the same core concept, cyclicality, eternity, and the unity of all things. Learning this symbolic vocabulary is the first step in becoming literate in this ancient code. It allows you to look at a myth and see past the surface drama of gods and monsters. You begin to translate the narrative. The hero is not just a man, he is the archetype of the conscious self. The dragon he slays is not just a beast, it is the chaos of his own untamed unconscious. By understanding the archetypal characters who populate these stories, we can finally start to hear what they have been saying for thousands of years. These archetypal figures are the fundamental grammatical structure of our lost language. Just as a sentence needs a subject and a verb to convey meaning, a myth requires the hero, the mentor, and the shadow to build a coherent narrative. These are not just characters, they are universal psychic structures, a concept pioneered by the psychologist Carl Jung. He proposed that these archetypes are innate blueprints within the human unconscious, shared by everyone. They form the very foundation of this divine language's grammar, the rules by which symbols are arranged to create profound meaning. The most famous of these grammatical rules is the hero's journey. This is far more than a simple plot template found in modern movies. It is a deep syntactic rule, a predictable sequence that describes the universal process of transformation and enlightenment. It begins with a call to adventure, a disruption to the ordinary world. Then comes the road of trials, where the hero is tested and aided by a mentor. Finally, there is the ultimate confrontation with the shadow and a return with new wisdom. This structure is a complete sentence in the language of the gods, and its subject is always the human soul. Another essential piece of this grammar is the trickster archetype. Think of Loki from Norse myths, Anansi the spider from West African folklore, or coyote from Native American traditions. Across the globe, this figure consistently serves the same grammatical function. The trickster introduces chaos, breaks rules, and creates change. In the sentence of a myth, the trickster is the catalyst, the unpredictable verb that forces the plot and the other characters to evolve. It is the element that prevents the cosmic order from becoming stagnant. When you understand that these patterns are not random but fundamental to the language itself, you can begin to parse myths for their deeper structural messages. You see a story about a young man leaving home, and you recognize it as a statement about the ego's journey into the unconscious. You hear a tale about a cunning spider, and you understand it as a lesson on the necessity of disruption for growth. The grammar gives the symbols their relationship and their purpose, and this intricate structure of archetypes and journeys is often reinforced and mirrored by another, even more precise layer of code, one written not in words, but in the silent, perfect language of sacred geometry and number. Beyond the grammar of archetypes lies an even more precise syntax, one written in the silent language of number and form. The Great Pyramid of Giza stands as a monumental testament to this idea. Its base perimeter divided by twice its height yields a close approximation of pi. Its orientation to true north is almost perfectly exact. This was not merely a tomb, it was a three-dimensional equation, a structure whose very geometry seems to encode fundamental truths about the planet and the cosmos. This points to a syntax built on mathematical constants, the rules for how the symbolic vocabulary should be arranged. The most famous of these constants is the golden ratio, often called phi. You can find this same ratio in the spiral of a galaxy, the curve of a nautilus shell, and the proportions of the Parthenon in Athens. In the lost language, phi is not just a number. It is a powerful adjective, a word meaning perfect balance, organic growth, and divine harmony. It modifies any symbol it touches, describing a state of ideal, natural proportion. Specific numbers themselves function as operators that change the meaning of the symbols they accompany. The number 3 is a powerful operator for unity and synthesis. We see it in the Christian Trinity, the three fates of Greek myth, and the three gunas of Hindu philosophy. Wherever it appears, it signifies a fundamental triad, a complete process of beginning, middle, and end. The number 4 grounds this unity in the material world. It represents the 4 classical elements, the 4 cardinal directions, and the 4 seasons. It is the number of stability, order, and manifest reality. Then there is the number 7, an operator of cosmic integration. It speaks through the 7 classical planets, the 7 days of creation, and the 7 primary chakras. It binds the celestial to the terrestrial, describing a complete system of spiritual ascent or cosmic law. These numerical operators give structure to the symbolic stories, telling you how many parts are involved and what kind of relationship they share. This mathematical syntax finds its purest visual expression in sacred geometry. A mandala is far more than a beautiful circular design. It is a complete visual sentence. Its center represents the unified source, the self, or the divine. The symmetrical patterns radiating outward describe the emanation of the cosmos from that single point. Walking a labyrinth is not just a physical act, it is a grammatical exercise. The single, winding path to the center and back is a sentence written on the ground, a statement about the journey of the soul into the depths of the self and its return to the world. Ancient temples were not built arbitrarily. They were constructed as physical expressions of these geometric and numerical principles, designed to align human consciousness with cosmic order. This entire mathematical layer reveals a staggering sophistication. It suggests that the architects of these myths possessed a profound understanding of the universe's underlying patterns, an understanding they embedded into stories, buildings, and art. And this knowledge, this entire coded system, may have been drawn from the most vast and enduring library available to them, the night sky. The silent syntax of number and geometry finds its ultimate expression in the greatest library ever known, the night sky itself. Ancient priests and storytellers did not look up and see a random scattering of lights. They saw a grand, moving storyboard, a cosmic text written in constellations and planetary paths. This celestial allegory is perhaps the most profound key to unlocking the lost language. The heavens provided the primary canvas for this divine communication, with the slow, majestic dance of the stars forming a dynamic script that played out over millennia. Consider the precession of the equinoxes, a wobble in the Earth's axis that takes about 26,000 years to complete a single cycle. This is not just an astronomical fact. In the language of myth, this vast cycle is translated into stories of world ages. The Greek myth of the Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, and Iron Age is a direct allegory for this precessional cycle. Similarly, the Hindu concept of the four yugas, from the Satya Yuga to the Kali Yuga, describes the same slow descent and eventual renewal of time, mirroring the celestial clock. These are not metaphors for moral decline, but precise, long-term observations of the sky encoded into epic poetry. To see this in action, we can look at the Egyptian story of Osiris. His murder by Set, the search by his wife Isis, and his eventual resurrection is a gripping drama on the surface, but when mapped to the sky, it becomes a detailed allegory for the annual cycle. Osiris is the constellation Orion. Set is the constellation Scorpio, which rises as Orion sets, appearing to conquer him. The star Sirius, associated with Isis, rises just before the sun, heralding the life-giving Nile flood and the symbolic rebirth of Osiris. The entire myth is a celestial instruction manual for tracking the seasons and understanding the cyclical nature of life and death. This astro-theological layer reveals that myths are, in part, an ancient and highly sophisticated form of astronomical science. The epic battles, the divine journeys, the tragic loves, they often correspond with stunning precision to the risings, settings, and conjunctions of celestial bodies. The slaying of a dragon might represent the sun conquering the constellation Draco at a certain time of year. A hero's journey through the underworld could be an allegory for the sun's path through the 12 signs of the zodiac during the night. This was a knowledge system of immense practical value, used for agriculture, navigation, and marking sacred time. It was written in the stars for all to see, but required the key of myth to be understood. This celestial code suggests that the wisdom of so-called lost civilizations was not magical, but meticulously observational. They studied the one text that could never be burned, the sky, and they embedded their findings into stories that could be passed down for countless generations. This grand cosmic text, however, was not meant to be a cold scientific record alone. It was intertwined with a far more intimate purpose, one that directed this celestial knowledge inward toward the transformation of the human soul itself. This division between public storytelling and private understanding was intentional. The profound truths of this celestial and symbolic language were not meant for casual ears. They were reserved for those who had undergone a rigorous process of preparation and initiation. Across the ancient world, from the sun-baked temples of Egypt to the secluded groves of Greece, mystery schools functioned as the protected universities for this divine curriculum. Here, the myths everyone knew were revealed to be something far greater than simple tales. They were blueprints for the soul's evolution, and initiates did not just hear these stories, they lived them. The most famous of these was the Eleusinian Mysteries in ancient Greece, centered on the myth of Demeter and Persephone. To the public, it was a story about the seasons. But for an initiate, it was a direct map of inner transformation. The abduction of Persephone by Hades was not just an event, it represented the descent of the conscious self into the unconscious underworld. Demeter's grief and search symbolized the soul's painful yearning for wholeness, and Persephone's cyclical return was the ultimate promise of rebirth and integration. The initiates did not simply listen to a priest recite this myth. They were guided through a powerful, multi-day ritual that mirrored the narrative exactly. Through sensory deprivation, sacred dramas, and likely the use of a psychoactive substance, they were led through their own symbolic death and rebirth. They experienced the despair of Demeter and the liberation of Persephone from within. The story became a lived reality, searing its psychological truth directly into their being. This was the ultimate purpose of the mystery schools, to use the mythic structure as a framework for direct, transformative experience. The hero's journey was not a story about someone else, it was the precise path the initiate walked. The call to adventure was their decision to seek initiation. The road of trials was the demanding purification process. The confrontation with the shadow was the terrifying encounter with their own inner darkness in the ritual's climax. And the return with the elixir was the wisdom and renewed perspective they carried back into the ordinary world. This process was a practical application of the language's deepest grammar, internalizing its core message of death and rebirth until it became an unshakable part of the initiate's consciousness. This secretive method of transmission was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it preserved the purity and power of the knowledge, protecting it from dilution or corruption for thousands of years. It ensured that only those who were properly prepared could access teachings that could be destabilizing or dangerous without context. But on the other hand, when these schools were finally suppressed and closed, the living thread of interpretation was severed. The masters who held the keys were gone, leaving behind only the public myths themselves, the cryptic monuments, and the scattered writings. We are now in the position of archaeologists, trying to reconstruct an entire language from its surviving texts without a native speaker to guide us. We have the symbols and the grammar, but we lost the living voice that gave them their full, transformative power. This profound loss makes the fragments we do possess all the more precious, pointing us toward a time when mythology was not a subject to be studied, but a reality to be lived. The sheer consistency of these myths across the globe is impossible to ignore. How is it that cultures with no possible contact, separated by continents and thousands of years, tell nearly identical stories? We find the tale of a great, world-covering flood not just in the Bible, but in the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, in Hindu scriptures, and in the legends of indigenous peoples from the Americas to Australia. The details are eerily similar: a warning from a god, a chosen family saved in a boat, and birds sent out to find dry land. This is not a coincidence. It is a fragment of a shared message, a single word spoken in different dialects. The same pattern appears with the dragon slayer. In Mesopotamia, the storm god Marduk battles the chaotic sea serpent Tiamat. In ancient Greece, Zeus defeats the monstrous Typhon. In England, St. George slays the dragon. The hero and the beast have different names, but the core grammatical structure of the story, the confrontation between cosmic order and primordial chaos, remains perfectly intact. These are not independent inventions. They are variations on a theme, different translations of the same original sentence written in the lost language of the gods. The creation myths themselves share a common vocabulary, the concept of a cosmic egg from which the universe hatches, appears in traditions from Finland to India to China. The idea of a primordial mound, the first land to emerge from a universal ocean, is found in both Egyptian and Polynesian mythology. This structural consistency is the Rosetta Stone for our decoding efforts. By lining up these different versions, we can compare the Greek translation of a symbolic concept with the Norse or the Vedic translation. We can start to see which elements are essential to the core message and which are local embellishments. This comparative work allows us to begin reconstructing the original form of these profound statements. Scholars of comparative mythology act like linguistic detectives, mapping these connections across time and space. Their work points toward two compelling possibilities. The first is the existence of a single, incredibly ancient source culture, a progenitor civilization whose myths and symbolic language were carried across the world by migrating peoples, slowly evolving into the distinct traditions we know today. The second possibility is that this language does not come from a lost city, but from a lost continent within ourselves. It may be a fundamental layer of the human unconscious, a shared psychic inheritance that spontaneously generates the same archetypal stories and symbols. In this view, the myth of the dying and rising god, like Osiris or Dionysus, is not a historical record but a perennial truth about the psyche's capacity for transformation, emerging independently in every culture that contemplates the mystery of death and rebirth. These cross-cultural parallels are far more than curiosities. They are the surviving evidence of a unified system of knowledge, a proto-language that predates all our current divisions. By studying the common grammar that connects St. George to Marduk, we are not just collecting stories, we are reassembling a shattered mirror, one that once reflected a complete and unified understanding of reality itself. The philosophical sophistication of this global language finds one of its most complete expressions in the ancient Sanskrit texts of India. Here, the language itself is not merely a tool for communication, but is revered as a sacred technology. Sanskrit is considered by many to be a divinely revealed tongue, its sounds and grammar so precise that they are believed to mirror the fundamental vibrational structure of reality. This positions Sanskrit as a potential candidate, a living fossil of the original language used to encode these profound truths. Within this framework, the Vedas, the oldest of these scriptures, are not just holy books, they are a vast library written in this complex code. The deities described within are far more than simple gods. Agni is not just the god of fire, he is the very personification of the transformative power of consciousness and the sacred spark within all beings. Indra, the storm god, represents the might of the disciplined mind, conquering the chaotic serpent Vritra, who symbolizes ignorance. Every figure is a multi-layered symbol, a word in this ancient lexicon representing both a natural force and a metaphysical principle. The entire Vedic cosmology presents a grand, cyclical vision of the universe, with ages of creation, preservation, and dissolution repeating in an endless rhythm. At the heart of this system is the concept of Brahman, the ultimate, unchanging reality that underlies all the shifting phenomena of the cosmos. The world we perceive with our senses is described as Maya, often translated as illusion. This is not to say the world is not real, but that its literal appearance is a veil. It is the narrative surface of the myth, the exciting story of gods and battles that hides the deeper, abstract truth. The concept of Maya is therefore a direct instruction from the ancient codifiers, a built-in warning label on every myth. It tells us not to get lost in the literal interpretation, but to look past the veil of the story to the principles it conceals. This is a crucial interpretive lens. When we hear a Greek myth about Zeus weaving a cloud of deception, we can now understand it through the Vedic concept of Maya as another way of describing the veiling nature of phenomenal reality. The precision found in Vedic rituals and mantras points to another astonishing dimension of this language, the power of sound itself. The meticulous recitation of mantras was not an act of prayer in a simple sense, but an exact science of vibration. It was understood that specific sounds, when produced with perfect frequency and intention, could resonate with and influence the very fabric of the cosmos. This suggests that the lost language may have operated not only on a symbolic and grammatical level, but also on a vibrational one. The myth was not just a story to be understood, but a resonant frequency to be experienced, a sonic key that could unlock states of consciousness and align the individual with cosmic order. The philosophical depth found in the Vedic tradition provides us with a powerful Rosetta Stone. It gives us the vocabulary to articulate what other mythologies might only imply. The struggle between order and chaos in Babylonian myth, the journey of the soul in Egyptian myth, the quest for the golden fleece in Greek myth, all can be re-examined through this sophisticated Indian lens. It reveals that the seeds of this universal language were sown across the entire world, and in the Vedic tradition, they grew into one of its most elaborate and well-preserved forms. The very word hieroglyph means sacred carving, a term that reveals how the Egyptians saw their writing not as a human invention, but as a direct gift from the gods. This was a language made solid, a system where every symbol was a potential gateway to a deeper truth. The famous scene of the weighing of the heart in the Hall of Judgment is the perfect example. On the surface, it is a test to enter the afterlife, the heart of the deceased placed on a scale against the feather of Mot, the goddess of truth and order. But in the symbolic language, this is a profound allegory for psychological integrity. The heart represents the entirety of a person's conscious life, their actions and intentions. The feather is not a literal weight, but the principle of cosmic harmony and truth. A heavy heart burdened by deceit and wrongdoing would sink the scale. A heart in alignment with Mot, light and pure, would achieve balance. This was not merely a post-mortem test, it was a spiritual instruction for how to live, a statement that inner truth is the only currency that matters in the cosmic economy. This theme of inner conflict encoded in cosmic drama is brilliantly illustrated by the eternal struggle between Horus and Set. The popular version is a simple tale of good versus evil, the falcon-headed god of kingship Horus avenging his father Osiris against the chaotic Set. But the deeper myth reveals a far more nuanced reality. Set was not purely a villain, he was a necessary force of chaos, storm, and the harsh desert, a counterbalance to the fertile, predictable order of the Nile represented by Osiris and Horus. Their 80-year conflict, with Horus losing an eye and Set suffering a grievous wound, is a symbolic sentence describing the perpetual struggle between order and chaos, both in the universe and within the human psyche. The resolution is not the annihilation of Set, but a reconciliation where both gods are ultimately integrated, with Horus ruling the ordered world and Set defending the solar bark from the serpent of entropy, Apophis. The message is clear: chaos is not to be utterly destroyed, but harnessed and given a purpose, a vital insight into the balance required for a whole self. The Egyptian pantheon itself functions as a complete symbolic catalogue, a living dictionary of this divine language. The animal-headed deities are not primitive imaginings, they are precise visual definitions. Anubis, the jackal-headed god, is the word for the liminal, the guide through transitions, perfectly symbolized by the jackal, a creature of the edges between the desert and the city, life and death. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, embodies the probing, analytical mind, the ibis beak resembling a pen constantly writing the laws of the universe. The goddess Sekhmet, with her lioness head, is the raw, untamed power of divine fury and healing, a force that can destroy or cleanse. Each deity is a specific term representing a fundamental human attribute or a powerful natural force, their interactions forming the complex sentences of myth. This entire symbolic system was driven by the Egyptian obsession with cycles, from the daily death and rebirth of the sun god Ra to the annual flooding of the Nile. Their myths are a continuous verb tense speaking of transformation and eternal return. The story of Osiris, murdered and dismembered only to be reassembled and reborn as Lord of the Afterlife, is a masterwork of this lexicon. It is a direct statement that life, death, and regeneration are not a linear path but an endless, sacred loop. This powerful vocabulary of cyclical renewal did not remain confined to the banks of the Nile. It flowed outward, profoundly influencing the mythological languages of its neighbors across the Mediterranean Sea. From the symbolic temples of Egypt, this language of myth traveled across the sea and found a new, vibrant voice in the hills of Greece. The Greek pantheon was not a council of remote, perfect beings, but a dramatic, often dysfunctional family whose stories played out on the stage of Mount Olympus. This was not a degradation of the code, but a brilliant evolution. The Greeks turned the abstract vocabulary of cosmic principles into a gripping theatrical play, where each god and goddess was a living, breathing embodiment of a fundamental force. Zeus was the thunderous principle of kingship and order itself. Aphrodite was the undeniable power of love and desire in motion. Ares was the raw, chaotic energy of conflict. Their passionate affairs, their bitter rivalries, and their divine interventions were not mere soap opera, but a dynamic lexicon of the forces that shape every human life. This allegorical drama reaches its peak in the epic tragedy of Prometheus. The Titan who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity is not just a rebellious figure. He is the very symbol of conscious intellect, the spark of foresight and technological advancement that separates humanity from the animals. His punishment, to be chained to a rock where an eagle eternally devours his liver, is a horrifyingly precise allegory. The liver was believed by the Greeks to be the seat of emotion and desire. The eternal torment represents the perpetual suffering that comes with consciousness, the price of knowledge, and the endless cycle of human passion and pain that our own foresight creates. It is a single, powerful sentence in the lost language about the burden and glory of human intelligence. Perhaps the most systematic application of this code is found in the 12 labors of Hercules. On the surface, they are a series of impossible tasks for a superhuman hero, but when viewed through the symbolic lens, they transform into a complete map of the soul's journey. Each labor corresponds directly to one of the 12 signs of the zodiac. The Nemean lion, a creature impervious to weapons, represents the sign of Leo and the labor of confronting the unbridled ego. The cleansing of the Augean stables, a task of redirecting rivers to wash away filth, aligns with Aquarius and symbolizes the purification of the soul through the flow of higher consciousness. Labor by labor, Hercules masters a different primal instinct and cosmic challenge, tracing the path of the sun through the celestial sphere. His journey is a detailed allegory for the individual's struggle to integrate the fragmented parts of the self into a unified, immortal whole. This interpretation was not a modern invention. The Greek philosophers themselves, particularly the Platonists, openly treated these myths as intricate allegories. They saw the turbulent stories of the gods as necessary dramatizations of profound philosophical truths about the nature of reality, the forms, and the journey of the soul. By wrapping these complex ideas in the captivating cloak of story, the ancient codifiers ensured their survival. The thrilling tale of Odysseus's long voyage home was far more likely to be passed down through generations than a dry philosophical treatise on the soul's journey through incarnation. This dramatization made the complex code of the gods accessible, memorable, and resilient, weaving it directly into the bedrock of Western thought and storytelling. This very tradition of seeking deeper meaning would later be inherited and transformed by a new, powerful system of thought that saw all of nature as a book written by the hand of God. The Greek dramatization of cosmic principles finds a stark and powerful counterpart in the frozen north. While the Olympians basked in eternal sunlight, the Norse gods inhabited a world perpetually balanced on the brink of twilight. Their mythology, preserved in the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda, speaks in a unique and hardened dialect of the universal language, one where the vocabulary is carved from ice and forged in fire. This is not a system focused on eternal harmony, but on the relentless cycles of creation and destruction, and the raw courage required to stand between them. The entire cosmology rests upon the world tree, Yggdrasil, a noun of immense scope. It is not just a tree, but the axis of all existence, its three great roots reaching into the wells of the gods, the frost giants, and the dead. It is constantly under assault, gnawed at by serpents and stags, a living symbol of a universe that is not static and perfect, but dynamic, suffering, and alive. This sets the stage for the central verb of the Norse lexicon, Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. Unlike other mythologies that promise eternal stability, the Norse code accepts destruction as an inevitable and necessary part of the cycle. Ragnarok is not an apocalypse in the sense of an ending, but a great cleansing, a cosmic conflagration that must occur so a new, greener world can emerge from the sea. The profound wisdom of this system is that it encodes a specific kind of strength, the strength to act with honor and purpose, even when you know the final outcome is fated and grim. This concept is weird, a form of cosmic fate that is woven rather than simply decreed, suggesting that while the broad tapestry is set, the threads each individual contributes still matter. At the heart of this worldview is the All-Father, Odin, and his relentless pursuit of wisdom. His most famous act is a perfect sentence in this ancient code. He journeys to the well of Mimir, a source of boundless knowledge, but the guardian Mimir demands a price, one of Odin's eyes. This is not a simple transaction. It is a profound metaphor for the nature of true insight. Odin's single eye represents his ordinary, dualistic perception, the way of seeing that divides the world into self and other, subject and object. To drink from the well of wisdom, he must willingly sacrifice that limited viewpoint. He plucks out his own eye and drops it into the well, gaining an inward, unified vision in return. He chooses the pain of losing one way of seeing to gain a deeper, more holistic understanding of reality. This is a direct instruction on the cost of enlightenment, the necessity of surrendering a partial truth to grasp a greater one. The tools for deciphering this harsh reality are the runes themselves. According to the myth, Odin did not invent them, he discovered them through a shamanic ordeal. He hung himself from the branches of Yggdrasil, pierced by his own spear, for 9 days and 9 nights, staring into the watery depths beneath the root. At the climax of his agony, he perceived the runes, saw their shapes, and grasped their power. This story frames the runic alphabet as something far more than letters. Each rune is a condensed symbol, a frozen concept holding multiple layers of meaning. The rune Ferhu, for instance, means cattle, but in the language of the gods, it represents mobile wealth, raw potential, and the energy of creation. The rune Uraz is the wild ox, a symbol of untamed strength, vital health, and primal force. To write with runes was not merely to spell words, it was to invoke these fundamental powers, to weave the very fabric of weird. The Norse poetic tradition reinforced this coded communication through kennings, metaphorical compound phrases that are like miniature riddles. The sea was not called the sea, it was the whale road. A sword was not a sword, it was the blood serpent. A warrior was the tree of battle. These kennings force both the poet and the listener to think symbolically, to see the interconnectedness of all things. They are a constant linguistic exercise in looking past the literal to the metaphorical, training the mind to operate in the deeper grammar of the divine language. The ultimate contribution of this northern dialect to the global lexicon is its stark existential vocabulary. It offers no promise of salvation, only the certainty of struggle and the value of courage. The gods themselves are not immortal, and they know it. They are preparing for a battle they are fated to lose, yet they do not despair. They gather their heroes in Valhalla, they hone their weapons, and they face their destiny with resolve. This is the final, powerful word that Norse mythology adds to the lost language, a word that means defiant integrity in the face of an uncaring universe. It teaches that meaning is not found in avoiding the end, but in the quality of one's actions along the way. And this very idea of finding meaning in the struggle would later be articulated through another powerful system, one that saw the entire natural world as a second scripture written by a single divine author. Far to the south, beneath a different canopy of stars, the language of the gods was spoken in a dialect of jaguars and obsidian. The myths of the Maya and the Aztecs introduce a stark and powerful grammatical rule into our universal code, the tense of cyclical time and sacred debt. Here, the cosmos was not a stable creation, but a fragile equilibrium that required constant payment to sustain. The very sun itself needed the energy of sacrificed hearts to continue its journey across the sky, framing existence as a profound transaction between humanity and the divine. This worldview transforms creation from a single event into a continuous, costly process, a cycle that must be fed or it will cease. The most eloquent symbol of this balanced worldview is the feathered serpent, known as Quetzalcoatl to the Aztecs and Cuculcan to the Maya. This is not a monster to be slain, but a breathtaking synthesis. The serpent, grounded in the earth, represents the material realm, the physical body, and the currents of life force. The Quetzal bird, soaring into the heavens, embodies the spirit, intellect, and the celestial realms. Their fusion into a single being is a complete sentence in this ancient language, a declaration that enlightenment is found not by escaping the world, but by uniting the serpent of our earthly nature with the feathered wings of our higher consciousness. This figure is a living verb meaning integration. This cyclical reality was tracked with breathtaking mathematical precision by the Maya. Their long count calendar was not merely a way to mark days, but a grand numerical expression of the mythic cycles. It quantified vast ages of creation and destruction, mirroring the qualitative stories of successive worlds found in their sacred text, the Popol Vuh. Their sophisticated awareness of astronomical cycles, like the precession of the equinoxes, allowed them to encode these immense spans of time into their temples and codices. The calendar was the syntax, the rigid grammatical structure that gave order to the symbolic vocabulary of their myths, proving that this language could be spoken with equal fluency in both story and number. This brings us to the most challenging word in this Mesoamerican dialect, the concept of sacrifice. To our modern sensibilities, the ritual of heart extraction is a horrifying act of violence. But within the logic of the divine language, it functions as a profound allegory. If the sun needs sustenance to rise and the world needs energy to continue, then what is the true fuel? The myth points toward a psychological truth. The heart was considered the seat of the life force and the ego. The act of sacrifice, then, becomes a powerful metaphor for the necessity of sacrificing our own lower nature, our selfish desires and attachments, to feed a higher cosmic order and achieve a more enlightened state of being. It is the ultimate allegory of surrendering the small self for the benefit of the greater whole, a theme of ego death that resonates deeply with the initiatory rituals of Greek mystery schools and the spiritual quests of heroes everywhere. The Popol Vuh masterfully encodes this entire process. The hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, do not conquer their enemies through brute force alone. They descend into the underworld of Xibalba and use cunning, trickery, and ultimately a symbolic act of death and resurrection to overcome the lords of death. Their journey is a precise roadmap for the soul, teaching that victory over the forces of decay and ignorance requires a willingness to undergo a symbolic death of the ego. The message woven into these Mesoamerican cycles is one of profound reciprocity. The universe operates on a sacred exchange, and our own transformation is part of that eternal, costly, and beautiful dance. This great deluge appears everywhere, a single sentence echoed in 1,000 tongues. From the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, where the god E warns Utnapishtim to build a boat, to the Hindu scriptures where the first man Manu is saved by a fish to preserve life after the flood, the structure remains unnervingly consistent. A divine warning, a constructed vessel, the preservation of a seed, and the rebirth of the world. This is not a fractured memory of one local disaster. It is a perfect archetype, a fundamental verb in the lost language that means total dissolution followed by regenerative rebirth. The ark itself is a profound symbol. It is not merely a boat, it is a sealed container, a protective womb floating on the chaotic waters of the unconscious. Within it, every species is paired, representing the preservation of all potential, the complete archetypal blueprint of creation, saved from the annihilating waves. The floodwaters are the agent that washes away an old, corrupted, or stagnant order, making way for a new world to emerge pristine and full of promise. This archetype operates on at least 3 distinct levels simultaneously, each a different translation of the same core message. On the grandest cosmic scale, the flood can be read as an allegory for the end of a world age. Just as the precession of the equinoxes slowly moves the sun into a new zodiacal constellation every 2,160 years, mythology speaks of the death of one age and the birth of another. The flood myth is the dramatic story form of this immense celestial transition, a symbolic reset of the cosmic clock. On a more tangible, geological level, the story could encode a collective, traumatic memory of rapid sea level rise at the end of the last ice age, when vast coastal lands were swallowed by the ocean in a span that would feel like a single lifetime. But the most intimate and powerful interpretation is psychological. Here, the flood represents the overwhelming deluge of the unconscious, the moment when the carefully constructed dam of the conscious ego shatters. Our ordered world, our sense of self, is drowned in a sea of repressed memories, instincts, and emotions. This is a terrifying, necessary crisis. To survive it, we must build our own ark, a vessel of a strengthened consciousness or a spiritual practice. We must gather the paired opposites within our own psyche, our masculine and feminine qualities, our light and shadow selves, and shelter them within this vessel as the storm of transformation rages. Only by passing through this inner flood can the old, rigid personality be dissolved, allowing a more integrated and authentic self to step onto the dry land of a new beginning. The universality of this story reveals a hard truth embedded in the fabric of reality, both outside and within us. Systems, whether they are civilizations, ecosystems, or individual identities, do not evolve gradually forever. They reach points of critical mass where they must be swept clean, where the slate must be wiped clear for a new sentence to be written. The flood myth is that sentence, a recurring, cyclical promise that from the deepest waters of chaos, new life is always born. This recurring pattern of the dying and rising God is perhaps the most profound grammatical rule in the entire divine language. It is a complete syntactic structure, a universal sentence that describes the fundamental law of transformation itself. From the Egyptian fields of Osiris to the Greek vineyards of Dionysus, and from the Mesopotamian plains of Tammuz to the story that would later shape the Western world, the narrative of Jesus, this same pattern repeats with stunning fidelity. It is not a story of mere tragedy followed by a miracle. It is a precise map of a cosmic and psychological process, a rule for how fundamental change must unfold. The first clause in this sentence is the death. This is never a random or meaningless end. It is the necessary dissolution of an old, fixed state of being. For the grain of wheat to sprout, the seed must first disintegrate in the dark soil. For the soul to grow, the comfortable but limiting identity of the ego must be broken open. The death of the god is this moment of radical deconstruction, the shattering of a former wholeness so that something new can be assembled in its place. This is the sacrifice, the voluntary or forced surrender of a current form to serve a higher, more complex order. Following this death comes the descent, the journey into the underworld or the belly of the whale. This is the middle clause of the sentence, the period of trial, reflection, and integration. It is not a passive waiting, but an active engagement with the deepest, most shadowy aspects of existence or the self. Osiris is dismembered and scattered. Inanna hangs her sacred objects on the 7 gates as she passes into the realm of her sister Ereshkigal. This is the process of being stripped bare, of confronting the fragmented and often terrifying contents of the unconscious. It is in this dark night of the soul that the essential work of reorganization happens, where the old pieces are gathered and understood in a new light. The final clause is the resurrection and return. This is not simply a return to the old life, but the emergence into a new, higher state of being. Osiris is reassembled and becomes the lord of a new realm, the afterlife. Jesus returns not as a mere man, but as a being of spirit. This resurrection is the fruit of the entire process, the attainment of a more integrated, enlightened, or eternal state. The God does not just come back to life, he comes back transformed, and he brings that transformative power back to the world. When you understand this syntax, you can read any of these myths and see the same underlying structure. The story of Dionysus, torn apart by titans and reborn, is not just a strange tale of chaos. It is a statement about the ecstatic dissolution of the individual self into the primal life force and its glorious, terrifying return. The tale of the Sumerian goddess Inanna's descent to reclaim her lover Tammuz from the underworld encodes the same cycle of loss, quest, and renewal that governs both the fertility of the land and the resilience of the human heart. This pattern is the language's definitive statement on how reality renews itself. It happens in nature with the endless cycle of the seasons. It happens in our own lives during periods of profound crisis and recovery. And it happens on the spiritual path, where the death of the ego is the prerequisite for the birth of true consciousness. To hear this sentence spoken in so many different dialects is to recognize a universal truth that from every symbolic death, a new world is always waiting to be born. The ancient philosophers who inherited these stories were the first to admit they were not literal truths. Plato himself, one of the pillars of Western thought, was openly hostile to the poets who recited the traditional myths, but not because he thought the stories were false. He was concerned that people would misunderstand their deeper meaning, taking the scandalous behavior of the gods at face value and missing the profound allegory beneath. For these thinkers, the idea that a myth was a simple record of events was absurd. They were the original cryptographers of this lost language, providing us with the first known decryption keys. The Stoic philosophers, for instance, developed a systematic method of interpretation. They read the entire Greek pantheon as a vibrant allegory for the natural world. To them, Zeus was not a man on a mountain, but the personification of the fiery ether, the active principle of the cosmos. Hera was the air, Poseidon the sea, and Demeter the earth. The dramatic interactions between the gods were not petty squabbles, but a dynamic, personified model of physics, describing how these fundamental elements interacted to create the world we experience. This was not a rejection of the myths, but a deep engagement with their true purpose, a translation from narrative into natural science. Centuries later, the Neoplatonists took this decoding even further. For thinkers like Celestius, the myths were not about the physical world, but about realities that exist entirely beyond it. In his concise work, On the Gods and the World, he makes a crucial distinction that echoes down the ages. He states that these mythical events never actually happened, but they always are. This is the master key. The abduction of Persephone did not occur in a single year in the distant past. It is an event that is eternally occurring, a perpetual drama within the human soul and the structure of reality itself. The descent into the underworld, the search, the cyclical return, these are not past tense verbs. They are present tense descriptions of how consciousness falls into matter and struggles to return to its source. In this view, every god and goddess is a symbol for a metaphysical principle, a level of reality between the utterly unknowable one and the material world we inhabit. Athena emerging fully formed from the head of Zeus is not a bizarre birth story. It is a precise allegory for divine wisdom or nous being born directly from the supreme principle of mind without any intermediary. This tradition of allegorical reading was the dominant mode of understanding mythology for over 1,000 years. It was how educated people engaged with their own sacred stories, seeing them as multi-layered texts that yielded different meanings to readers at different levels of understanding. A farmer might see Demeter as the goddess of the harvest. A statesman might see her as the principle of civilization and law, while a philosopher initiate would see her as the world's soul from which all individual souls descend. All these interpretations were valid, existing on different rungs of a single ladder leading toward truth. This sophisticated art of interpretation, however, began to fade with the rise of powerful new ways of seeing the world. The spread of literalist Abrahamic religions, which emphasized historical truth and direct revelation, made the pagan allegorical approach seem suspect or even heretical. Later, the brilliant rise of scientific materialism completed this shift, teaching the world to value only the literal, the empirical, the physically verifiable. The mythic imagination was demoted from being a source of profound wisdom to a collection of primitive fables or, at best, interesting literary artifacts. We were left with the shell of the stories but lost the living tradition of how to crack them open. To hear the language of the gods today, we must consciously recover this lost art. We must learn to ask not, did this happen, but what does this represent? We must look at the characters and events not as historical figures, but as moving parts in a great, symbolic machine designed to convey truths that literal language struggles to contain. This philosophical lens is not an optional extra, it is the very spectacles we need to read the text. This shift toward literalism acted like a great forgetting, a slow closing of the mind's symbolic eye. For centuries, the ancient stories had been understood as vessels of inner truth, but a new preference emerged, one that demanded they be read as strict historical records. This was a profound change in the very rules of interpretation. The story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden is a perfect example of this lost key. When read literally, it becomes a simple tale of two people, a fruit and a punishment. But in the language of the gods, it is a powerful allegory for the birth of human consciousness itself. The garden represents a state of unconscious unity with nature, a paradise of instinct. The serpent is the catalyst, the symbol of a rising awareness, of knowledge and duality. Eating the forbidden fruit is the moment the human ego awakens, the fall into the world of opposites, of knowing good and evil, of self and other. This is not a historical crime, but a description of the inevitable and painful journey every individual makes from childhood innocence to adult self-awareness. To read it as mere history is to miss its entire psychological depth. This literalist wave did not happen by accident. It was propelled by powerful institutional forces that sought to consolidate spiritual authority. The suppression of pagan mystery schools was a systematic campaign to dismantle the very institutions where this symbolic language was taught and experienced directly. The condemnation of so-called heretical thinkers, those who insisted on an inner, mystical meaning to Scripture, silenced a vital line of transmission. Wisdom that had once been open to seekers through initiation was now deemed dangerous, its keepers pushed to the margins of society. The rich, textured vocabulary of the divine language was flattened into a single, authorized narrative, a story to be believed, not a code to be deciphered. This created a deep cultural schism. On one side stood faith, now often defined as belief in the literal truth of miraculous events. On the other side, centuries later, emerged science, which rightly rejected these literal miracles as incompatible with observable nature. The two entered into a bitter and unnecessary conflict, a war between two languages that were never meant to speak about the same level of reality. Science sought truths about the external, material world. The mythic code spoke truths about the internal, psychological, and spiritual world. But with the symbolic key lost, the profound allegories of religion were defenseless against the empirical arguments of science. The result was a cultural amnesia, a collective forgetting that these ancient narratives were ever meant to be read as anything other than fact or fable. This is precisely why the language of the gods feels so lost to us today. Its continuous thread was severed. The general populace was left with the husk of the stories, stripped of their nourishing kernel of meaning. The code did not vanish entirely, of course. It was preserved like precious scrolls in a hidden library, within the rituals of secret societies and the cryptic writings of alchemists and mystics. These were the custodians of the old grammar, protecting the keys through an age that had forgotten what doors they were meant to open. We are now the heirs of that great disruption, living in a world that has largely lost the ability to hear the deeper echoes in its oldest stories. The great forgetting was not permanent. As the 20th century dawned, a few brilliant minds began to listen for the ancient whispers within the old stories, piecing together the fragments of the lost language. They approached it not as priests or philosophers, but as explorers of the inner world, using the new vocabulary of psychology. The most influential of these figures was Carl Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist who dared to suggest that the human mind was not a blank slate. He proposed the existence of a collective unconscious, a deep, shared layer of the psyche common to all humanity, inherited rather than personally acquired. This was the theoretical bedrock for the entire symbolic system. The recurring figures of the hero, the shadow, the trickster, and the Great Mother were not just characters, he argued. They were archetypes, fundamental, universal psychic structures that shape our dreams, our stories, and our very perception of reality. Jung had, in effect, provided a scientific-sounding framework for the ancient grammar, explaining why a symbol like the serpent could hold such potent and consistent meaning across cultures separated by millennia. It was because the serpent was already living inside us, a pre-existing form in the shared architecture of the human soul. This idea gave the language of the gods a new home, locating its source not in the stars or in lost civilizations, but within the vast, uncharted territory of our own mind. Building directly on this foundation, the scholar Joseph Campbell spent a lifetime mapping the expressions of this collective unconscious across the world's mythologies. His great contribution was the monomyth, the hero's journey, which he identified as a single, universal story hidden within thousands of cultural variants. Campbell did not invent this pattern. He rediscovered a fundamental grammatical rule that had been used by storytellers and mystics for thousands of years. The call to adventure, the road of trials, the meeting with the goddess, the atonement with the father, and the final return, this was not just a good plot. It was the deep syntax of transformation, a precise sentence describing the journey of the ego as it ventures into the unconscious, confronts its own shadow, and returns integrated and whole. By showing that this same structure underpinned everything from the Epic of Gilgamesh to the story of Buddha and the narratives of modern films, Campbell was demonstrating the enduring power of this universal language. He argued passionately that myths are not lies but guides. They are indispensable maps for navigating the perilous journey of life, showing us how to face our own dragons and discover the treasure of our true potential. Alongside him, the historian of religions Mircea Eliade deepened this perspective. He showed how, for ancient and indigenous peoples, myth was not a tale about a sacred time, but a means of accessing it. By ritually re-enacting the myth of a god or a primordial event, they were not merely commemorating the past, they were stepping out of ordinary, profane time and into sacred, eternal time, the time of the gods. This ritual function reveals the ultimate purpose of the divine language. It was not meant to be a passive description of reality, but an active tool for transforming it, a technology for aligning human life with cosmic patterns. The work of these three pioneers collectively pulled mythology out of the dusty cabinets of antiquarians and restored its rightful place as a vital, living source of wisdom. They gave us a new lexicon, words like archetype and monomyth, to articulate what the ancients had always known. The language of the gods had not vanished. We had simply forgotten how to listen. Their efforts reopened the dialogue, suggesting that the oldest stories we possess are, in fact, the most modern guidebooks to the human spirit. This search for a universal symbolic grammar inevitably leads to a tantalizing question. Could this lost language have left its fingerprints not only in our stories but in the very structure of our speech? A controversial field of study known as comparative linguistics attempts to answer this by reconstructing the deepest roots of human language, searching for a primordial tongue scholars call the Proto-Indo-European language. This was not a language of nouns and verbs as we know it, but a system of root sounds from which nearly half the world's languages would eventually grow, from English and Greek to Sanskrit and Latin. The evidence for this common ancestry is not just grammatical, it is profoundly mythological. Look at the names for the supreme sky father across these cultures. In the ancient Vedic hymns of India, he is Dyaus Pitta. In the poetry of Greece, he is Zeus Pater. In the rituals of Rome, he is Jupiter. The phonetic and conceptual resemblance is undeniable. These are not just similar gods, they are linguistic siblings, different pronunciations of the same original title from a time before these peoples scattered across the globe. This suggests that the core vocabulary of the gods, the very names of its primary archetypes, was carried within the language itself, passed down and transformed over thousands of years like a precious heirloom. The radical possibility is that these root words were not arbitrary labels. They could be the fragmented phonemes of the original code, sonic symbols whose very vibrations were meant to resonate with specific concepts or even states of consciousness. This idea adds a powerful sonic dimension to our symbolic language. If a visual symbol like the serpent encodes a complex idea, perhaps a sacred spoken word was designed to evoke a specific feeling or shift in awareness, turning myth from a story to be understood into a resonant frequency to be experienced. This approach, however, faces significant limitations. Language evolves at a staggering rate, and reconstructing a proto-language is like trying to reassemble a shattered vase from a handful of scattered pieces. We can trace the names of gods and concepts, but can we ever recover the living context, the tonal quality, or the ritual intent with which they were spoken? The search for a single language for all of humanity remains a speculative dream, as the linguistic diversity outside the Indo-European family is vast and deeply ancient. Yet, the undeniable connections in our mythological vocabulary point to a stunning reality. Long before the written word, a shared understanding of the divine was woven into the very fabric of speech, and the echoes of that original tongue can still be heard today, whispered in the sacred names we have carried for millennia. This profound shift in perspective brings the entire cosmic drama down to earth, directly into the theater of the human mind. If the language of the gods has a final, ultimate purpose, it may not be to chart the stars, but to map the uncharted territory within us. The pantheon of deities, with all their conflicts and alliances, can be understood as a vibrant personification of the warring and cooperating forces inside our own psyche. The journey of the hero through a world of gods and monsters is, in its truest sense, an allegory for the individual's perilous journey of self-discovery. Every battle with a dragon or a shadowy beast is a dramatic representation of our struggle with the repressed, chaotic elements of our own subconscious. The wise mentor who appears with a crucial gift is not an external savior, but the sudden emergence of our own higher intuition, a deeper wisdom we did not know we possessed. The ultimate return home, where the hero brings back a transformative elixir for his people, symbolizes the achievement of psychological wholeness, where the integrated self shares its hard-won wisdom with the world. From this vantage point, the entire mythological corpus transforms. It is no longer a collection of ancient curiosities. It becomes the most ancient and comprehensive system of psychology ever devised, a detailed cartography of the soul written in the only language durable enough to survive the ages, the language of symbol and story. Learning to read this divine language is therefore synonymous with the process of individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming a complete and authentic individual. The myths provide the map, and the archetypes are the landmarks along the way. When you understand that Athena represents the cool, strategic power of your own intellect, and that Ares is the raw, untamed force of your aggression, their eternal conflict becomes an internal dialogue you can observe and mediate. The story of Prometheus is no longer about a titan's punishment, but a parable about the glorious and terrible burden of your own conscious awareness. This interpretation does not diminish the myths, it electrifies them. It makes them urgently relevant to your life here and now. The quest for the Holy Grail is not a medieval fantasy, it is the search for your own deepest meaning and purpose. The labyrinth of the Minotaur is not a stone prison in Crete. It is the confusing maze of your own unconscious, where you must confront the monstrous hybrid of your deepest fears and instincts in order to find your way back to the light. This is the final and perhaps most important key to the lost language. It was never truly lost because its native speakers are us. We have been speaking it in our dreams and living it in our struggles all along. The myths are merely the eternal mirror held up by our ancestors, showing us the timeless, archetypal patterns of our own becoming. The words of a myth are only one part of its message. To feel its full power, you must also learn to listen. Deep within the stone chambers of Newgrange in Ireland or the underground hypogeum of Malta, something remarkable happens with sound. Whispers can travel clearly across vast distances, and specific frequencies create strange, resonant echoes that seem to make the very stone vibrate. This is not an architectural accident. The emerging science of archaeoacoustics reveals that these ancient builders possessed a sophisticated understanding of sound, designing spaces where resonance was a feature, not a flaw. They were constructing instruments of stone, temples where the human voice could be transformed into something more than speech. This suggests a breathtaking extension of the lost language. What if the myths were not only symbolic texts to be decoded by the mind, but sonic keys to be experienced by the entire body? The stories of gods and heroes, when chanted as rhythmic mantras or hymns within these resonant chambers, could have acted as a technology of consciousness. The steady drone, the repetitive phonetic pattern, the overwhelming resonance, all working in concert to quiet the everyday mind and induce a trance-like state. In this altered awareness, the symbolic meaning of the myth was no longer an intellectual concept. It became a direct, felt experience. The initiate did not just hear about the hero's journey into the underworld, they vibrationally journeyed there themselves. This idea finds perfect expression in the ancient Vedic concept of Nada Brahma, the world is sound. This philosophy posits that the entire universe is a manifestation of primordial vibration, a single, resonant note from which all of existence unfolds. Similarly, the Greek philosopher Pythagoras taught of the music of the spheres, a celestial harmony produced by the mathematical movements of the planets, a symphony inaudible to our ordinary ears but constituting the true fabric of reality. Both traditions, separated by vast distances, were pointing to the same profound truth, that vibration is the foundational layer of creation. In this context, the lost language gains an acoustic dimension. Its grammar includes not just symbols and numbers, but also specific frequencies, rhythms, and phonetic patterns. The powerful Om chant in Hindu and Buddhist traditions is not merely a word. It is a carrier wave for a state of being, a sonic tool designed to align the individual's vibration with the fundamental hum of the cosmos. The careful, melodic recitation of the Homeric hymns in Greece or the rhythmic drumming in shamanic rituals across the globe served the same function. They were not entertainment, they were sonic technology using the physical properties of sound to unlock the deeper, psychological layers of the myth. This is a layer of the code that is almost completely inaccessible to us today. We can analyze the symbols and map the hero's journey, but we cannot easily replicate the exact sonic environment, the specific frequency of a stone chamber, or the precise intonation of a chant that has been lost for millennia. The living voice of the language has fallen silent, leaving behind only the written score. Yet the echoes remain, hinting that the most profound truths of these ancient stories were not meant to be read, but to be resonated with, a vibration that could literally rearrange the listener's soul from the inside out. This slow wobble in the Earth's axis is the silent metronome of the cosmos, a cycle so vast it defines the rhythm of ages. Known as the precession of the equinoxes, this 26,000-year journey of our planet's orientation is the grandest timepiece we will ever know. It is the clock behind the great stories, the hidden engine driving the succession of world ages described in myth after myth. The ancient Greeks spoke of a golden age giving way to silver, then bronze, and finally an iron age of strife. Hindu scriptures detail the four yugas, descending from a Satya yuga of truth to a Kali yuga of conflict. These are not mere metaphors for moral decay. They are precise allegorical descriptions of this immense processional cycle, a single great year measured in millennia. Just as our annual year has 4 seasons, this great year is divided into 12 astrological ages, each lasting about 2,160 years. The transition from one of these ages to the next is not a quiet tick of a clock. In the language of the gods, it is a cosmic cataclysm. The death of an old god and the violent birth of a new pantheon is the narrative code for this celestial handover. The epic battles in mythology, where a younger generation of gods overthrows the older, chaotic titans, are not just stories of power struggles. They are dramatic accounts of the processional pointer shifting from one zodiacal constellation to the next, marking the end of one world age and the painful, glorious birth of another. This framework elevates these stories from simple folklore to a sophisticated, long-term historical record. It reveals that our ancestors were not just looking at the stars, they were keeping time on a scale we can barely comprehend, encoding their observations into the very structure of their most sacred narratives. The myths become a living library of cosmic history, written in the only ink permanent enough to last for thousands of years, the eternal movements of the heavens themselves. The existence of a universal symbolic language woven into our oldest stories forces a radical reassessment of our own history and the very fabric of reality. It suggests that our ancestors were not primitive, but possessed a unified vision of existence, one where the separation between science, spirituality, and psychology was an artificial and meaningless division. For them, the dance of a planet was a divine thought, and the struggle of a hero was a law of physics. They saw a cosmos that was not dead matter, but a living, conscious, and deeply symbolic text. This is a worldview that modern physics is only now beginning to echo, with its talk of a participatory universe and the observer effect, where consciousness itself seems to be a fundamental ingredient of reality. The ancient language implies that the material world we take for granted is not the primary reality. It is the surface narrative, the literal translation of a far deeper, more abstract, and mentally structured source code. The recurring myth of a fall from a golden age, a time when gods walked with humans, can be understood as our collective departure from this symbolic perception. It is the story of humanity's descent into materialism and literalism, a long forgetting of how to read the world as a living allegory. We traded a multidimensional reality for a flat, one-dimensional one, mistaking the map for the territory. We began to believe that the story of Adam and Eve was about two people in a garden, rather than a profound allegory for the birth of self-awareness. We thought the Great Flood was about water, rather than a psychological and cosmic reset. In doing so, we lost our fluency in the native tongue of the cosmos. This is why recovering this language is so vital. It is not a hobby for archaeologists or a pastime for myth enthusiasts. It is a philosophical imperative, a potential key to regaining a holistic consciousness. To become literate in this symbolic code is to heal the schism within ourselves, to see the universe once more as an integrated whole where every outer event resonates with an inner truth, and every scientific fact sings in harmony with a spiritual principle. It is an invitation to awaken from the long sleep of literalism and remember that we are not just living in the universe, but that the universe is also living through us. So how do you begin to read these ancient stories with the eyes of an initiate? The process is less like scholarly study and more like learning a new language, and you can start with any myth you choose. The first and most crucial step is to consciously set aside the assumption that you are reading a literal account of history. This is not about disbelief, but about shifting your perspective. You are not looking for what happened, but for what is being communicated. Approach the story as if it were a dream, where every element is a symbolic representation of a deeper truth. With this lens in place, you can begin the real work of translation. Your first task is to identify the key symbols. Look at the prominent animals, objects, and numbers. Is there a serpent, a bull, or an eagle? Is there a special sword, a cup, or a key? Are there recurring numbers like 3, 7, or 12? These are the nouns of the divine language. A quick investigation into their universal meanings opens up the text. The serpent, as we have seen, is rarely just a snake. It is a symbol of knowledge, transformation, or hidden power. The number 7 almost always points to a process of cosmic integration or spiritual completion. Next, map the characters onto the fundamental archetypes. Who is the hero? Not necessarily the most powerful figure, but the one on a journey of change, who acts as the mentor, providing wisdom or a crucial tool. Who or what is the threshold guardian, the obstacle that tests the hero's resolve? And most importantly, identify the shadow, the antagonist who often represents the qualities the hero must confront and integrate. These archetypes are the grammatical subjects and objects of the sentence, giving the symbols their roles and relationships. Then lift your gaze to the heavens. Ask if the story could be a celestial allegory. Does the hero's journey mirror the path of the sun? Could that dragon be a constellation like Draco? This astrotheological layer was the ancient world's grand canvas, and recognizing it can reveal the story as a sophisticated observation of cosmic cycles. The final and most transformative step is to turn the myth inward. Reflect on what the story is saying about your own inner world. Where is your labyrinth? What is your Minotaur? Who or what is your Ariadne, offering you a thread of intuition to guide you through the darkness? This is where myth stops being a story about other people and becomes a living map of your own psyche. Let us try this method with the classic Greek myth of Theseus and the Minotaur. On the surface, it is a thrilling adventure, a hero slaying a monster in a maze. But when we apply our decoding steps, the story transforms. First, we set aside literalism. We are not looking for a historical king or a real labyrinth on Crete. We are interpreting a symbolic drama. Next, we identify the key symbols. The labyrinth itself is a profound symbol, not of a physical prison, but of the complex, winding pathways of our own unconscious mind, a place of confusion where we can easily become lost. The Minotaur, the half-man, half-bull at its center, is a classic representation of the shadow self, the bestial, untamed, and frightening aspects of our own nature that we have repressed and hidden away. The ball of thread given by Ariadne is the guiding light of intuition and conscious awareness, the thin but unbreakable line that connects us to our higher self even in the deepest darkness. Now we map the archetypes. Theseus is clearly the hero, the conscious ego that decides to venture into the unknown. Ariadne is the mentor, offering the crucial tool for the journey. The Minotaur is the ultimate shadow, the monster that must be faced. King Minos could be seen as a threshold guardian, the ruler of the old order that demands a sacrifice and sets the challenge. When we consider celestial correlations, the story aligns beautifully. Theseus can be seen as the sun hero, and the labyrinth as the confusing underworld of the night sky through which the sun must travel. The Minotaur may correlate with the constellation Taurus, the bull, which the sun conquers in its seasonal journey. Finally, we turn the story inward. Your labyrinth is any complex challenge in your life, a period of confusion or a difficult emotional state. Your Minotaur is the fear, anger, or shame you have locked away in the center of that maze. And your Ariadne's thread is that quiet, inner voice of wisdom, the intuition or practice that, if you trust it, will guide you through the confusion, allow you to confront your shadow, and lead you back into the light transformed. This practical skill does more than unlock old stories. It unlocks a deeper understanding of yourself, turning every myth into a mirror and every hero's journey into a potential path for your own. Our journey through this hidden code reveals a stunning truth, that ancient myths are not primitive fables but a sophisticated, universal language. This is a system built from symbols, archetypes, and sacred numbers, a durable vessel designed to carry profound wisdom about the cosmos and the human soul across countless generations. From the Vedic seers who saw the universe as sound to the Greek philosophers who decoded gods as natural forces, the keepers of this knowledge understood a powerful secret. Abstract truths are fragile when written on parchment or carved in stone, but they become immortal when woven into the fabric of a compelling story. A story is resilient. It can survive the collapse of empires, traveling across continents and through millennia, all while protecting its hidden meaning within an engaging narrative shell. This was the genius of the ancient codifiers. They transformed the complex laws of consciousness and cosmology into the epic drama of Olympus, the perilous journey of the hero, and the eternal struggle between order and chaos. For ages, this was the way knowledge lived, passed down not as dry doctrine but as a living, breathing mythology that spoke to every level of human experience. A great disruption occurred, however, when we began to lose the keys to this symbolic language. The rise of rigid literalism in both religious and scientific thought flattened these multi-dimensional allegories into mere historical accounts or primitive superstitions. We were taught to ask, did this happen, instead of the more profound question, what does this represent? The living thread of interpretation was severed, and we were left with the husk of the stories, their nourishing kernel of meaning forgotten. Yet the code was never truly broken. In the last century, pioneers like Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell began to reassemble the fragments, giving us new words like archetype and monomyth to articulate the old grammar. Their work, alongside a growing return to allegorical thinking, is helping us recover this priceless heritage. We are remembering how to read the world as a symbolic text once more. This means that the next time you hear an old myth, you can listen with new ears. You can hear the whisper of the gods not as a distant echo from a dead past, but as a living message about your own journey. The story of the labyrinth is about your own confusion. The dragon is a fear you have yet to face. The hero's return is the wholeness you are seeking. The greatest mystery unlocked by this language is not buried in ancient ruins. It lives in the potential for rediscovery that lies within us all. It invites you to see your own life as a myth in the making, a heroic journey where every challenge is an initiation and every insight is a treasure brought back from the depths. If this exploration has resonated with you, we would love to hear which myth you would most like to decode. Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more journeys into the unknown.